revolves around the time I was in the pharmaceutical sales industry. And I had been calling on this very large hospital system that was not utilizing my product at the time because it was not on the hospital formulary. And the formulary is a list of drugs that the hospital is allowed to use on the patients that are within that institution. And this hospital system was very important to my business at the time. And they had been exclusively using my competitor's product for a very long time. And even though I had been routinely calling on this system, I felt I wasn't really making any headway with getting my product on the formulary. So one day I found out that one of the physicians I called on was a member of the formulary committee, and this individual could basically have my drug added to the list. So I got really excited about this, and I went and spoke with this physician who I really respected, and he respected me. And I asked him if he could just simply request for my drug to be put on the formulary, and that would be that. Well, he nicely said, Ellen, no, I can't do that. You have got to continue to show up and service this hospital as if you have the business. And I cannot take the easy way out for you here. You're going to have to just earn it. So I was very frustrated at the time, and I because I respected this gentleman so much, I did what he said. I continued to call on the hospital system. I showed up in a very positive manner as if I had the business, and I wasn't sure if this was going to work, but I complied. And then one day, about a year after that conversation, I showed up to the pharmacy and they informed me that my competitor had done something inappropriate, had slipped up, and they granted me the business. So, wow, I couldn't believe it. I was so happy, and I just wanted to reinforce to everyone, and this has been a theme throughout my life, that you just have to show up and persevere, and things that you really want to happen will happen if you do that. So that's my reflection backwards. And thank you, Robert, for having me join your program this evening.
Oh, not a problem at all. And for our guests out there, hello, everybody. There were some technical difficulties, so you probably came in midstream and heard Ellen share her story. But just to give you a little backup, this is a live stream of the Intentionally Overheard podcast. Typically, most of you have listened to this on audio, but we did decide to go with video as well. And so this particular series of episodes is called Appreciation Backwards. And what do I mean by that? Appreciation Backwards is really about reflections and looking back over your life and looking at situations that you didn't get it at the time, maybe when you were a teenager or you were a smaller child, and maybe even early adulthood, that you had to learn a lesson and it didn't sit well. Somebody may have given you advice. They may not have given you the business, as Ellen had mentioned in her case. And, you know, you may have taken it a certain way at that point in life, but now you look back and you say, I get it. There was a lesson there. And so these episodes on the Intentionally Overheard podcast is about appreciation backwards. And tonight, as well as next Wednesday and the following Wednesday, you'll hear my guests share stories about these personal reflections about how it helped them mature in life, how it helped them be a better person. And so I am glad you all joined us to hear these stories. I tell you, they have been heartwarming to hear them, and I wanted to make sure that I shared them with you. And so, Ellen, I want to get back to you for just a moment. When the doctor told you no,
Mhm.
how did you feel after that? Was there any anger or resentment that you held because you knew this doctor and you
Mm,
thought maybe you had it in? Tell me about how did you bottle that all up and just continue to show up?
well, as I mentioned in the story, Robert, I was very frustrated with that answer. I was like, that was not what I was expecting him to say. I thought he would do me a favor, so to speak,
Uh-huh.
and, make this an easier situation for me by just making a phone call. But when he didn't, at the time, I was like, God, I was perplexed, like, why he just
Yes.
do that, and then this whole deal with you just have to keep showing up and blah, 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 and I was like, oh. And I had been doing that, and it wasn't getting me anywhere, so I think the lesson was, you just have to be positive, and if it's something you really want, you just have to keep at it, and
Yeah.
there's no easy way out. You just have to work for it, and I did.
Ellen, now was there a point where, we can all get working for it and giving it your best, but was there really a point maybe that you said, you know what, this is for the birds. I'm gonna go just try to get some new business. I'm gonna leave this alone. Were you ever tempted to throw in the towel?
No, because I think one reason was because I did call on this physician outside of this hospital situation. He kinda kept me in check.
Uh,
So he would say, "How are you doing? Are you going?" So it always helps to have someone that keeps you honest with, something you're trying to achieve if you feel like you're wobbling. So I think that really helped me stay the path,
yeah.
was having someone check to make sure I was doing what had been discussed.
Now, with that lesson, you have two wonderful daughters. Did that lesson help you pass something along to them about work and putting in the time and the effort and showing up?
Yes, and not quitting.
Yes. Okay.
Absolutely, especially with my older daughter who was in a sports situation where she felt like she wasn't being played on the team and she wanted to quit, and so I had to have a little s conversation with her about the importance of staying in place, being present, being involved, even though she wasn't actively a part playing on the team, and what happened for her at the end of it all was they gave her the sportsmanship award. The team gave her the sportsmanship award because of her positivity throughout the season, even though she didn't play. She
Yeah.
helped all the other people through her attitude and her just being present and cheering them on. So
Wonderful.
it did float over to my children, and
Okay.
yeah.
Now, I do understand that you also, by this physician telling you no initially, that it did foster a great relationship between the two of you, and how you really respected him for doing that.
Yes, and I thanked him for
Yes.
not giving me the easy way out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you build up some, skill and perseverance through things.
Yes.
So I did acknowledge him, for what he had told me, and, was grateful that in the end that he had given me that advice.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
Skip Lockwood. Now, you have an appreciation backward moment that when you and I initially talked about this, you told me that this is about stories that you initially heard in the back seat of, and I do recall a station wagon, and one of the station wagons had walnut paneling on the side. So tell us a little bit about those stories that you heard when you were a kid and how they came back around in life to help you be a better person, maybe find your purpose, be a better husband, dad, father. Tell us about that.
Well, Robert, and thank you so much. And it's an honor to be here tonight. I have to say, the first thing that came to mind when you kind of proffered this assignment was all of the advice that one gets before they have children, and everything that everybody tells you. And a lot of that when you don't have children, you're like, yeah, yeah, whatever, that'll be fine. Until you have children, you realize that 80% of what they told you was right on. And it's a miracle that we continue to have children. If we actually told parents what this whole process is going to entail. And so that's what immediately came to mind, but kind of a larger picture or a larger idea that began to develop as I started thinking about this was, I grew up in a family of teachers and preachers. You couldn't swing a dead cat and not hit one of those in my family. And so stories are an innate part of our of our functionality. It was always a great pleasure on, in the summertime to be sitting in a grandparent's house and hear them tell various family stories, most of them quite funny, most of them having an interesting twist, or I wish I had gained the same story capacities some of them um, had that had brought to me. But the thing that as I got deeper in this, is I started thinking about all of these amazing stories, and at the time you don't understand them. They're interesting. Some of them are funny. Some of them describe different foibles that different members of the family have. I get a better understanding of why some members of my family don't have a good sense of direction, a better understanding of why some are clumsy. But when it's all said and done, you listen to them and you go on. And sometimes, as I said, we lived far apart. And so there would be long car rides and you would hear these stories told, and sometimes they put you right to sleep. And it's not until much later in life where you start to see, as the old hymn says, these are the ties that bind. It was these stories that provide, first of all, they remind you that you're not alone. You're a part of a group and a lineage that are related, and that you come from a unique set of people with a unique set of experiences. And every time we tell those stories, we extend we kind of extend the inclusion. So by hearing the stories of what happened with my grandfather or great grandfather and having those told by my grandmother and then my father, it works us all in, or it knits us all together and kind of makes life a little bit more continuous. And the other part of that was just, that has become more fascinating and more relevant to me as I've aged, is it's also been, it serves as a deep reservoir of it's comforting and can be comforting. It is a lot of good. The real thing that I've discovered is this is how we convey what's important to us. This is how, as a family moving through, this is where we talk to each other about what is really truly important to us, what we value, what concerns us, how we've gotten out of tight spaces, or how we have gotten into big messes. And that, that's almost like a security blanket as you grow older, because it reminds you, especially as you grow older and start getting to the point where you're looking at your own mortality, that you can wrap yourselves in these stories and understand and be comforted by them, and to recognize your space in the overall and the overall continuum. I think one of the things that's particularly challenging in this world, and especially with the internet, is it's incredibly easy to become isolated and feel insignificant. And it's in these stories where you can revel in your uniqueness, and you can revel in your in your cohesion and in this group that you are a part of. And even though it's kind of accidental that you've ended up in this place, you have this series of people that that you can basically integrate with over time. And so overall, the stories about, when the squirrel got into the house, or how we dealt, when I may or may not have done certain things, or the time my brother set my dad's Bible on fire on the kitchen stove. All of these things are both uh, are both comforting and enlightening, and many times, it's a good funny story in my family is highly valued.
Yeah.
And so, these are ways that we bind ourselves together as we go forward in a rather large and anonymous life.
Skip, do you think we're telling enough stories? One of the things, and you mentioned it about the internet and
Mhm.
social media. Uh, do you think we're telling enough stories to the next generation? Because to a certain degree, I think we've lost a lot of them to social media. I
Mhm.
mean, it's part of their bodies now on the phone, and they're on these different platforms. But have we told enough stories to keep them interested um, in life and wanting to know what mom and dad experienced? I see they see so many things on social media about other people living lives, but are we doing enough storytelling to let kids know, hey, look, this is my story. This is
Mhm.
how I grew up. Are we doing enough of that?
I think one of the big challenges is that we have presented only kind of social media tends to present only a very specific style of story. And they tend to be short so that they fit within the amount of time that can be
Yeah.
done. And I think we've lost a lot of the nuance. I think we have lost the experience of storytelling. And that I think is where the real value lies, is in the one-on-one sharing of the information.
Yeah.
And when we go out and we have a good, interesting story and we splatter it out on Facebook or something like that. And it's kind of interesting, and people may chuckle at it or comment on it or tell you, give you a thumbs up about what that particular story was. But in many ways, they haven't really connected with that story, and they
Yeah.
certainly haven't connected in it. The thing that makes, and going back, and sorry to make this a brief on humor storytelling, but it's the person telling the story that gives the story its color and
Yes.
gives it its depth. And that's my grandfather, being an extraordinarily intelligent man and also a preacher, must have had 10,000 stories, and they covered everything that you could possibly imagine in the human condition. And when you could sit in the room with him and listen to him tell those stories and weave them together into kind of this kind of tapestry of life, that's where you got the deep understanding of them.
Yes.
That's where the connection was. And the problem that I see, even like when I watch my own kids and they come in and tell me about Mr. Beast, what Mr. Beast did, or what this happened on this TikTok channel or whatever, it's interesting, and a lot of it is valid, but you were not connected to those people in the same way, and I don't think they form the same kinds of connections.
Yeah.
They're just because it's so brief, it's so cut together, and also it's so curated,
Yes.
Mhm.
Indeed. Indeed.
and that's
Ellen,
the other thing.
Ellen, I saw you shaking your head there.
Mhm.
Let me hear your comments on that.
No, I totally agree. It's about the person telling the story that makes it very special. The and that's really an art. I mean, it's really an art to be a good storyteller. Um, and I think in doing a lot of training in my career, the things that people remember are told through a story.
Yeah.
More than just throwing facts out and this and that. But when you can weave your material into a story,
Yeah.
that they remember and will take away. So that's a very special way of communicating. And I agree with Skip. I'm I don't see it happening as much now as probably would it should be happening.
Yeah.
Um, because you're right, people are going to different sources like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, different ways that they're getting information, and it isn't in that same storytelling fashion.
Do you think, Ellen, you mentioned something about stats? Now when we were parents, you kind of throw the stats at the kids about what you need them to do and clean the bed. You get better grades if your bed is made before you go off to school, and to eat breakfast. So those are kind of the stat stories, if you will. But do you think now that they're older, it's the stories that they remember? And did you find yourself going through a transition where you had to kind of leave the parenting aside and become the coach, the advisor, in terms of telling stories that I know you're a little older now. I don't need to tell you to make your bed, but let me just share stories with you now. Did you go through that phase?
Are you asking me, Robert?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Y- Yes, we did go through that phase. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It
Okay.
Because that seemed to resonate more than just the plain facts, right?
Yes.
I remember my daughter came in one day from in high school. She was not enthralled with math. She doesn't not like math. And she was moaning and groaning about decimals. Like, I don't
Ah,
understand why I have to understand these decimals. And I simply said, well, one day it's going to be the difference between you making $10 where that little point, that little dot is, and you making $10,000. So that
mm,
little dot is very important. And when I said that, she was like, oh, oh, okay. I mean, sort of
yeah.
applying it to real life, and
Yeah.
to something tangible. I think, and actually, and Skip, you come from a family of teachers. Your best teachers were always the ones that took the information they were trying to teach and made it practical through real life stories, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I remember that my best teachers were the ones that could translate all of what we were supposed to be learning into something relevant.
Right.
Mm.
And then you're like, oh, okay, I understand why I need to understand this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. Skip, you had a comment?
No, I'm just saying it puts it in context.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And it makes it makes and especially for kids who are in the early stages of discovering these totally new concepts like decimals or fractions, or our fifth graders in our in our school system are currently learning about the boys that participated in the Civil War, and it's interesting as you listen to the kids and watch them, the kind of eye opening that goes on, because so often when we approach history, and especially at a younger age, it's a very general thing. There was a war; it lasted from here to here, and it was there, and we went to there, and this person was in it, and this person was in it. And then it's a totally different story when you're reading a letter from a 12-year-old who is writing back to his parents, and he's hundreds of miles from home, and he has been marching and in battles and had to steal food, or had to watch friends get killed, and all of a sudden you can see the light going on in the kids' heads of that this history is, or in this particular part of history, is much deeper and much more challenging than I understood it before, because how they understood it before was names, dates, places, and people, and now
Hmm.
they're seeing it as individuals that they can relate to, that and now that experience, while still in a kid in 2023, what's happening in the mid 1800s is still quite foreign, but there's no separating the similarities either.
Yeah.
And so these stories coming from uh, the the children who were part of the Civil War has a huge impact, and really sparks kids' interest. It gets them engaged,
Hmm.
and it's a valuable
Hmm.
undertaking.
Do you find at this point in your lives that when you had these lessons or words of wisdom that were dropped on you, explain some of these moments when you get it, when you look back and reflect on. Skip, I see you laughing there. That and I think we all go through that one time where we're in the car, maybe the kids in the back, and you repeat, "Don't make me come back there," and you're like, "Oh God, I'm
That's,
sounding like my parents. I'm
that's
sounding like my
exactly what I was thinking about. You were reading my mind.
just."
Don't make me pull this car over.
So tell me about some of those moments where it just comes back to you and you go, "Oh my God, my mom said this, my dad said that." Tell me about how that make you feel. Do you look back now and say, "Mom and dad were really on to something back then. I didn't get it then, but they were on to something."
I think to some extent it makes me. There are times when this has happened, or times it's been especially prevalent during child rearing. I have an 11-year-old and two 9-year-olds, and it's the thing that I find interesting is the thing about child rearing is that when you're in the heat of it, it's like being in an offshore storm. Everything is moving around and slamming, and you're not sure if the boat's going to sink, and there are waves washing over you. And then a year later, you look back at what seemed like insurmountable, and you're like, man, that wasn't so bad. Now that I have some perspective on it, and I think the same thing happens when I look back. I feel like I owe my parents a lot more apologies
Yes.
for
Yes.
for uh, you know but to some extent, I talk to my own kids about, it's one thing to talk about and be interested in and be all excited about skydiving. It's another thing altogether to step to the edge of the door and throw yourself out
Yeah.
of a perfectly good airplane. um and I said, we can talk about it all we want, but until you step off the edge, you'll never fully understand or fully know what you're doing. And I think that's one of the things I would like to feel like my kids are picking up, but probably aren't at this point, is the idea that, look, there's a lot of stuff you just got to do it, and that's the only way to get through it and or to find out what's on the other side. You
Yeah.
just have to do it. And that's hard to always feel like they're picking up on that,
Yeah.
and what you would like to have happen. But that's the other part of it. They got to do it for themselves. And as a parent, sometimes that's beyond frustrating,
Yes.
because you want to say, I can show you how to get, I have the map, but they don't, but I need to let you wander through and make your own map to get to where you need to go.
Ellen, tell me about some moments that you look back and you say, "Hey, I really get this now." And how do you feel when those memories come back?
Well, similar to what Skip is saying, it's you don't fully appreciate it till you have to do it yourself, or you're in that same situation, and then it it comes to life. So, and honestly, sometimes I have talked with my kids who are now adults, and I've apologized to them, because sometimes you did things that you maybe really, in retrospect, wish you had done differently.
Mhm.
But I think they understand why you did what you did, because they're now under the same types of pressures you were back then,
Yes.
right? You're juggling a job, you're juggling a lot of things, and sometimes the fuse gets short.
Yes.
And, so I think they get it. They understand why maybe there was a reaction to some things that they did.
Right.
That, you maybe wish you had reacted differently, but
Yeah.
at least they understand why it happened the way it happened. And like I said, I have on numerous occasions, said, look, I'm really sorry that I probably reacted that way to y'all.
Yes.
But it was because of the situation. And I've learned from it, and you try not to repeat it, um, but I think it does my heart good to feel like I know that they have a better understanding of why some things went down the way they went down.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Skip and Ellen, we are just about out of time, but I've got to tell you, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your stories and dropping pearls of wisdom. I'm hoping that our listeners and our viewers can take something away from this. I know from talking to you before we did the show that your stories, and you had plenty. And so we just picked, we've just picked a few, but I thank you for being my guest tonight, and wish you all the best and a wonderful, happy new year to both of you.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert.
Thank
Love
you.
being here. Good to see you, Skip.
Good seeing you too, Ellen.
Ladies
Happy
and
New
gentlemen,
Year.
our listeners out there, for those of you who have been asking about the Dream It, Believe It, Do It, Be It merchandise, you can visit the Dream It, Believe It, Do It, Be It.com website and pick up the latest merchandise, and we can get that shipped out to you right away. Again, we thank you for being here this evening. Have a wonderful rest of the evening and a happy new year. Thank you, everybody.